Greetings, my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training material video broadcast out to you because you're watching. First happening on YouTube and subsequently, who knows. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, anyone interested in surviving as a Pilates instructor, or interested in using core new tension in their own movement or the instruction of other movement that has nothing to do with Pilates. So, just two things today. There's a lot going on with Facebook for me and for everybody. And the latest thing was a text box about core new tension and a question-answer extension of that I filled in, which I liked the way that went and would seek to further that by having a text box that just said MMP, right? And it's so difficult for me to synthesize what matters to the point where it's just a simple expression rather than complexity, and yet delivers the key characteristics of MMP. And for me, the first and foremost thing that comes to mind with MMP is that it is about an experience. MMP is about an experience. Your target is an experience. As an instructor, if I've got a person under my care in a session or a group, if I'm acting as instructor, my number one concern is care for that person or group. And then my target is an experience. And now you can fill this in, right? What's the experience? To me, the experience is complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit as a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. And that's why it's an experience, because you actually achieve in doing Pilates the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. Otherwise, there'd be no reason. Well, I'm jumping to a different part of Joe's text, but where he says, otherwise there would be no valid reason for your interest in contrology. It's the experience. And it can be yours too, and it can be any of thousands of other people's view of Pilates, but when it comes right down to me trying to explain MMP in a word, I'd say it's an experience. Okay? And then that opens you up as a Pilates instructor to use Joe's words to define the experience that you're after. Okay? The other word, the second word in terms of MMP, would be choreography. And I use choreography because it's really arranged movement. It's not just exercises in a row. There's more to it than just the exercises and the order that they're in, to me, deserve the adjective of choreography. It's Joe's choreography. It's his sequence. It's his mat. Right? And it's there within that you're in the pursuit of performing it, because the purpose of Pilates is conditioning. You do the choreography, you do the sequence, you do the dance, you do the movements in the order that they're in a flow, in pursuit of being fully concentrated on the purpose of the exercise while you're doing it. And so the choreography, the acknowledgement, the admission, the recognition, the admittance that, hey, Joe's choreography in his book makes a statement all its own. That choreography is the target. And then a third word that I would use to describe MMP, and I bet you're not ready for this one, because I had to think about it before I actually chose to put it in that position. It may lose favor later, but for right now, MMP talks about capacities. That's a key word. And understanding MMP, yeah, it's understand about capacities. And so it's like, okay, what kind of capacities are we talking about? We're talking about what kind of capacities does your body have? What kind of capacity does your mind have? And what kind of capacity does your spirit have? Now, within MMP, and so that's why capacity illuminates the interpretation of spirit as a necessary presence of being fully concentrated on the purpose of the exercise while you're doing it, and that fully concentrated somehow means that you're in observance of what's going on, and that you're listening to what's going on, and that you're connected to it sensationally beyond just thinking about it. So capacities points to the human being's capacity in their body and in their mind and in their listener or their observer or their concentrator. What situational awareness is all about, what we talked about last time, which was about look out. What does look out mean? The more vehemently it's spoken or said, or the energy that it's said, what does that mean? Look out. Tap into your sensors, if you were a starship, but tap into your own sensation and make sure you're making the most of the sensation that's available to you. With your eyes and your nose, smell that. Something might be burning. All of it. Your sensations allow you to tap into your environment and make the most of your reaction to it. So, maybe I had a third one, because after conditioning, why do conditioning? Because on Facebook I made the point that Pilates isn't about rehab. Doing Pilates is conditioning so you don't ever fall into the situation where you need rehab. Which is why doing Pilates is often done by those doing rehab, because Pilates is a conditioning method based on whole body, and to the extent that you lose that capacity of whole body because you're injured, you want out of the injury. So Pilates isn't pointed at fixing your injury. Pilates is about conditioning your body in a particular way to avoid injury. And that's why historically people have come to Pilates with injury and fallen in love with it and gone back to what they've done. Well, maybe not fallen in love with it, but got healthy enough to go back to what they did. They get injured and they come back to... So Pilates has a history of fixing or recovery from injury to the point where, even historically, Pilates then just becomes a regime of conditioning to avoid the injury in the first place. You see? But it's important for me, to you, to see that Pilates isn't about injury. The pursuit of Pilates is a pursuit of conditioning. From my point of view, the field of physical therapy is about addressing an injury so a person can get back to normal. It's so easy to have a Pilates instructor's point of view drawn toward the injury, the issue, right? Toward the issue, and then the person carrying the issue becomes the primary importance, which then drags you into making money off of the person and their issues being more important than what you earn from teaching a conditioning program, a method that's really good to recover from injury by pursuing. See? Pilates is whole body. The whole thing is a salute to the physics that the body shows up in. And so, why condition? And to me that has to do with anticipation, right? And anticipation comes, sadly, from experience, or if no other way, directly through experience, one can learn about anticipation. And because one learns about anticipation, one then takes the foresight or the preparatory caution of conditioning in order to be ready for what comes up, which is life. You know, to meet life's many and daily tasks that come with astrology. Our interpretation of physical fitness. I mean, this was written forever ago by Joe. It's his book, right? Is the attainment and maintenance of a uniformly developed body, ching, 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 uniformly developed body, and with a sound mind, ching, 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 body, mind, fully capable of naturally, easily, and satisfactorily performing our many and varied daily tasks with spontaneous zest and pleasure. You have to go back to the beginning and say, their interpretation of physical fitness. That you can respond to the many and daily varied tasks that come up in our daily lives with zest and pleasure. We can enjoy our life. We can enjoy being in our body. We can be pain-free. we can be injury-free, right? And that the pursuit of the choreography is a means of conditioning in order to be ready for whatever comes up. Now, if you come to Pilates because you're injured, that's fine and you're welcome, and Pilates will have the same effect on you that it has on anybody else by taking it towards a whole body experience, where then the injury dissolves into insignificance and even out of memory, because we're back to that daily zest and pleasure of being in our body and just handling what comes up, right? So, from my point of view, MMP's point of view, Pilates is ideal conditioning for the real world. Ideal conditioning for the real world. Now, why is that? Well, it's because when you perform Joe's mat sequence, when you do the choreography, you appreciate the reflection of the world that you participate in by virtue of the way you control your movement through that choreography. Okay? So, gosh, all right. MMP, ideal, right? Ideal, there's another word. I should write it down. Ideal. Why is it ideal? Why is it ideal? The whole thing is maybe it's not. Maybe there's no ideal within Pilates at all. But that brings me to the question rolling around in my head that I haven't really expressed anywhere, but another text box would be, without MMP, where would you be? Without the MMP perspective that there's an ideal within Joe's original work, then what are you left with? Now, granted, some may prefer a world that's just dominated by aristocratic privilege and the court of Pilates, where who you are and who you know and what you make of things is as valid and as credible as anything else, because it's all within that category of lineage defined by somebody that knew Joe and the tradition that spread off from there. There's nothing wrong with tradition. But see, another text box is MMP took Pilates someplace new. And the reason I use past tense is because I've been professing this now for decades all over the world, and there are those who perceive the view, the point of view, enough to know that it's already a done deal, or it's in situ. It's the notion that there's an ideal within Joe's original work is in situ in the world as of 2018. That's just my opinion, and maybe it will just fade into dust, and then all you'll have left is, if without MMP, and what does that mean? That refers to the ideal, the point of view that there's an ideal within the original work, no matter who you are or who you studied with. None of the aristocratic lineage tradition, that's all valuable and part of the culture, none of that will ever eclipse Joe's original work and the statement that that original work makes. And we may lament that if we just want to make of it whatever we want, but the good news is you can acknowledge that, yeah, it's an idea, now here's what I make of it. See? And the good news is that then the idea within Joe's original work, based on the original work, which makes MMP neoclassical. There's nothing in MMP that contradicts classical Pilates. There's some things that seem to contradict but merely extend classical Pilates by virtue of looking at the ideal within the classical. You follow that? To whatever extent you want to make Pilates something in and of itself that's your interpretation, go right ahead. That's all I'm doing. And this is one view of Pilates out of 10,000. My honor and privilege is that I get to talk to you in such a convenient, affordable way in a recording that might last, probably will last, long after my ability to broadcast anymore. Ideal, yeah, right there, ideal. If it wasn't for the pursuit of some ideal expression of each exercise, my mind would fall asleep. And if it was just a mental lab of what muscles are doing what, in terms of the more you know doesn't make the experience. Right? I mean, it all depends on your audience, whether you say lower belly muscle or pyramidalis. And the whole point of language is to make someone feel comfortable with what you're saying in a way that they can identify with it and get the message of whatever you're saying. So I think a good instructor never falls prey to using how much they know to make a point about what they know, rather than saying something in a way that reinforces the familiarity between you and your student or students. I'm still lingering in a workshop interest that talks about the pelvic floor. And to me, the pelvic floor is a huge subject of Pilates culture, and yet such a small part to the grip at the hip that the pelvic floor feeds into. And all of that's important, and all of that musculature that's in there is way complicated. And there, it was my message yesterday about don't let biology or any of the specifics distract you from the abstraction. And the abstract is the ideal. The abstract is understanding that the body, all of its musculature, seeks to accomplish the physics that it is capable of to move through space the way it can. And to that extent, you go beyond Pilates and pursuing the experience to an enlightened, not enlightened maybe, but at least unknown to most of the world, especially in the world of biodynamics and the science of biodynamics. None of that has really gotten into core new tension yet. And maybe it never will. And maybe it's just a figment of my imagination. But I know that this experience is not an experience, is not a figment of my imagination. And even if rotating in opposite directions between axes is not literal enough for you, even if it's just imagination, look at the results it gives you in your ability to feel alignment and to trigger uniform usage. So when you're doing Pilates, fluorescence is part of that. But your mind is also active, and your observer, your listener capacity is also present, and your job as an instructor is to, in the moment, offer instruction that allows for a student to find a complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit as a state of being in the moment of the doing. Being in the body in the moment of the doing. Which just means now, in the present. And so you could get way philosophical about Pilates and how its whole essence is the required essence is presence in the moment. Without that capacity of spirit in the body, that's Joe's word. My word would be observer in the spirit of physics, and listener to the extent that there's involvement in sensation beyond just thinking. See, beyond your thinking, there's more you than just what you think. And if you want to think that there's two levels of thinking, okay, there's the prefrontal cortex level of thinking, and there's the thinking that happens at the amygdala and hippocampal areas of the brain, which are just like different parts of the brain, some more unto themselves than others that are more connected to what's out there. And so I hope you hear me saying that Pilates is the pursuit of conditioning. It's just nature. And it attracts injury from any source of injury because it's about whole body. And in the pursuit of whole body, injury dissolves into memory. Out of memory. Even better. Oh yeah, I forgot I broke my back when I was a teenager. Oh yeah, I had a collapsed lung once, but it works pretty good now. So, conditioning. It's a method of conditioning, and conditioning is anticipatory. You anticipate what comes up, and because stuff does come up, it's important to condition, even if you're healthy. And what happens many times is that people start pursuing Pilates and they don't give it up. I had a U.S. Air Force fighter jet pilot, retired. But he was a fighter jet pilot his whole life, and he retired. And he was doing Pilates, and he'd been doing it for a while, a few months. And he said, you know, I'm not sure if Pilates is doing me any good, you know. And as an instructor, I saw it as a ploy for me to try to reinforce what he already knew, right? That's how I saw it. So I made sure I was going to look at his face when I responded to him. And I said, well, there's a sure way to tell whether Pilates is working or not. And he was interested. What's the sure way? And I watched his face as I said, just stop doing Pilates. And his face processed, projected, imagined stopping doing Pilates. And to me, the response was, well, that's out of the question. He's not going to do that. And so he gave me a mental query, like he asked me a question. He showed a doubt in the mind, right? And I gave him a response for his mind to contemplate, which was a future of not doing Pilates. And it was like, oh no, 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 I like this. I'm going to keep doing this. Whether it makes sense or not in the head, it made sense to him in his body. And of course, he was small in stature, as guys go, wiry, you know, wiry is an expression. The kind of guy who would fit in a cockpit of a jet fighter, right? And serious, disciplined, and yet all of the stretch of Pilates he must have totally fallen in love with in terms of what it did for him, as it does for everyone, bringing about a balance between flexibility and strength. I was watching a live broadcast in a different language of someone about to do the roll down, and I was pleased to see that the initiation of the roll down was with a rotation at the ankles. In my terminology, that would be establishing an endpoint of tension. And of course, in this video, there wasn't really any further elaboration of creating an endpoint of rotation at the hips, or that you press out. Well, there was pressing out the heels to make it happen, but I think there's a whole cultural taboo about pointing to or highlighting rotation at the hips. And I understand that that's a whole, where all the sex happens, that matters in terms of transference of genes, right? But it's where all the action happens in terms of where the body stabilizes from, and not to know and deal with and cue towards deepening the grip at the hip to where you go from a really wide grip around an axis, like trying to grip a foam roller, versus a 2-inch wooden bar. And there's a size at which your grip is optimally strength for what you've got in your wrist, your hand, your arm, right? It amazes me how I see the world out there at large, and for one thing, how confusing it is, and for another, how it's almost forced to have to do other things with Pilates because of not taking Pilates more towards what exists within it ideally. And that's okay, and that's human nature, and there will always be a spectrum of where people apply themselves and what they do for what they charge. It's commercialism, and I'm all for that. Somewhere along the line, the way I have hope that this recording will make money for me, because I will have it as a recording, and if you're interested in what I've had to say, And I will certainly come to a point where I no longer have an ability to say anything. Right? And that takes me into life can't live forever. Read between the lines. See behind the curtain. Add two and two. Direct your own thinking. Direct your own thinking. And Geist